Hi, and welcome to the Big Book Project. My name is Lori Feathers, and I'm your host. And today I'm so pleased that I'm joined by Professor Dorian Stuber, who is going to talk to us a little bit about the book and kind of his reaction to the book. We're going to have a more or less general discussion rather than kind of talking about this week's reading assignment. So, welcome, Dorian.
Hi, Lori. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. You and I are friends from being on the jury of the Republic of Consciousness Prize for the U.S. and Canada together, and I know that you're a great reader. Why don't you kind of tell me a little bit about your academic career and where this book kind of fits into your general area of study?
Sure. Well, over the last 15 years, I've been working primarily and teaching primarily in the field of Holocaust literature. That is a subject area that is not directly connected to my dissertation or work that I did in graduate school primarily. So I trained as a modernist. I did a comparative literature degree, and I emphasized German language and English language modernism. Um, and Obviously, Holocaust is within that time frame, depending on how you think about modernism. But there was nothing. It was not the kind of thing that I worked on as a graduate student. I had taken a course on Holocaust literature in college. That was really powerful and influential for me. And so that was sort of and then I wrote a master's thesis on the idea of trauma. And so that, you could see some connections there for sure. Right. So that was sort of it was always a little bit in the back of my mind, I guess, and my interests. And then when I got the job that at a liberal arts college, I was kind of given the freedom because I was teaching in such a small department that I could and needed to do other things in addition to kind of like what was ostensibly my field of specialization. And so I sort of thought, well, that Holocaust course was so great, and I would love to do that. And the department was really generous about it, and they're like, sure, why not? That developed into something unexpected for me. It became really kind of a passion, I guess, if one could say that. It's a bit weird, but sort of real area of deep and profound interest for me that I then sort of expanded on and started teaching a number of courses related to the Holocaust, to like the literature of the Holocaust, but literature after the Holocaust. And we might think about the kindly ones as fitting in there in some ways. Yeah, and then my interests sort of grew into outreach in terms of like helping to teach secondary school teachers how to teach Holocaust literature. They are often tasked with doing that and often feel unprepared to do it. That's sort of what I've been working on most recently. But so that's kind of a big picture sort of sense of some of my intellectual trajectory, if I could put it that way. And the Littell book in particular, I think that I read it in the summer of 2018, I believe, and I spent a lot of the summer doing it. Rather, just as you and your readers are, I think, right? I mean, it's a big project. Especially at first, I was able only to read it in fairly small chunks, like kind of 20-page chunks at a time, like because I was finding it extremely distressing, even for someone who works regularly on some pretty distressing material. There's something about this text that struck me in particular that way. I actually reached out to the translator, to Charlotte Mandel, about that, about how she managed to do it, which was, and her, I thought her response was quite interesting. We could certainly talk about that if you like. So I read it on my own, sort of with an eye to like, well, here's an important work of literature that's related to the Holocaust. I knew that it was divided its readers. Some people were very passionate about it, well, they're passionate in both directions. Some people really liked it, and some people really didn't like it. So I was like, I should know what's going on with that. Um, Quickly became clear that it was not something I could ever imagine teaching, just for various reasons, its size being a big one. But I'm really glad that I read it, and it has stayed with me to this day, the last thing I'll say for now is that I'm going to be talking today like off of that memory primarily. I took a few notes at the time. I don't have I'm moving right now, and my copy of the book is packed away. So I didn't do the homework. I regret this book. So you're going to have to take my comments kind of for what they're worth. But it did leave an impression, and so I certainly still have some thoughts about it. So that's probably a lot more than you wanted in response to your question. But
No, that's perfect. Do you have thoughts about how this novel, of course, it's a fictionalized telling, but how it kind of differs from most other novels about the Holocaust? Is it just the graphic detail? And I think in addition to all of the details about the horrific stuff,
mm-hmm,
and maybe paired with that, there's an awful lot of detail about the mechanism and the machinery and the
mm-hmm,
procedures that I
mm-hmm,
guess you'd call like the Nazi bureaucracy in a way.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, to me that's a lot of the strength of the book. I mean, I think it's a very strange book in a lot of ways. Like the fact that Littell would write that book when he did, I don't know that much about him, but it's odd, right? Like I don't know that he has a lot of particular direct family connection or something like that, you know? So either to perpetrators or to victims, and or at least he has not, to my knowledge, kind of like made a big deal of that one way or the other. I mean, when you're talking about Holocaust literature, one thing you can think about is like literature kind of from the period of the Holocaust, right? In the years before or during or maybe immediately after, written by people who were directly involved in that experience. Or you can think about literature about the Holocaust, which would extend to the present day and seems to only be growing, right? Like there's just constantly new books that feature the Holocaust, and frankly, I think a lot of them are really dubious. And I haven't. There's lots of them that I haven't even read, but there is a whole. I was just recently doing some work at the Holocaust Museum in D.C., and my colleagues there and I were joking about like it's like the trade unionists of Auschwitz. There's like so many books. They run a whole trade school there apparently because there's like the tattooist of Auschwitz and the shoemaker of Auschwitz and the candlestick maker of Auschwitz and wherever the hell it is, I mean, it's like, and so it's like a cottage industry kind of, and these are books I think that, in as much as I have dabbled in them, like have very particular and peculiar ideas about the Holocaust, which I would say are ultimately trying to redeem it in some fashion, like trying to tell something hopeful or optimistic, even though there's also kind of a lot of tugging at your heartstrings. Which I think is a pretty dubious thing to do about the Holocaust because there's not it's not a redemptive experience, right? And in that regard, Littell's book is really compelling to me because I don't think that it tries to do that. One of the big surprising things about it, of course, is that it is narrated from a perpetrator perspective, and it's hardly the only book that does that. Um, but it is very self-aware, I think, in its use of that voice, of that perspective, and a lot of the interest of the book, I find, is in like the way we are forced to wrestle with Aue as a character, right? Like Max is he's sort of seductive to us in certain kinds of ways, I think. But the book is very clear, I think, that we need to think about what that means. And maybe seductive is the wrong word. I'm curious what you think, but like he's very compelling in a lot of ways. And um, so there's a lot of interesting stuff there, just in terms of like of the narrative perspective. And then one other thing that's pretty striking about this book in relation to Holocaust depictions, representations of the Holocaust, is its panorama, right? You really are getting a really wide and historically quite accurate sense of what the Nazis came to call the final solution. And I do admire that about the book greatly. A lot of Holocaust texts either because they are coming from one person's particular, like a memoir of someone who survived, and so therefore they're concentrating on that particular experience that that person had, or they are maybe written more recently and are writing about a very like a non-realist kind of Holocaust too, like where Auschwitz, or sort of an idea of Auschwitz, like barking dogs and striped uniforms and trains, are kind of like this iconography that is standing in for like a lot of historical detail, right? Littell's like really showing you the wide range of like the fact that there's so much time spent on what the Einsatzgruppen did in the East, right, in Ukraine and former Soviet Union and stuff, and that's such the so-called Holocaust by bullets. That is such an important part of the story of the Holocaust, and it is totally underrepresented in literary representations because there were so few survivors of those mass shootings, right? So he's giving us, we really like, we see so much stuff that has also been at the same time something that he gets criticized for in the book, kind of the Forrest Gump thing. And I don't know if y'all have talked about this at all, like kind of the way in which like Max sort of like ends up being everywhere at all the important events, and he like meets so many of the important actual historical figures and stuff. You know what I mean? And like, this is a real risk that Littell takes in my view. And I honestly never can quite decide whether I think he fully pulls that off or if it's a little bit ridiculous, and maybe that's kind of also the point. I'm not sure. Like, what I don't know. Where are you at with that? Like, do you think it's like,
I guess I think that yeah, that part's got to be a bit unbelievable. But there are other aspects of Max's character that I think are even more unbelievable. I guess one of the things that I've been trying to grapple with, how to think about the book and write about the book
mm-hmm,
in the Substack, is like what is Littell's intent here? Is
yeah,
he trying to give us Max as like the prototypical Nazi? Uh, Sometimes I think yes, in more of a I hesitate to say sympathetic, but Max
mm-hmm,
has lots of
mm-hmm,
questions. He's not
mm-hmm,
just kind of
mm-hmm,
like blindly following orders. He's following orders, but he's also at times sickened by the orders.
totally,
He
mm-hmm,
he questions the orders, but then also we've got this whole like sexually deviant
yeah,
aspect of him, which certainly can't be the case that like all of the SS officers had this like weird
no,
sexuality and like
totally
history
not,
to
right?
them.
Yeah, totally.
So
And in fact, yeah, totally.
so I don't know. Do you think that the story of the sister story and
Uh-huh.
like this kind of obsession that he has and hatred slash needy love for his mother,
Yeah.
do you think that do you see that as an unnecessary part of the book?
Yeah, I don't know if I'd say unnecessary. I would say it's the big problem with the book, in my opinion. Like, I mean, just to speak to the deviancy thing, like, absolutely right, you're correct. Like, that was not like some kind of Nazi norm or something. Like there's a way in which like Nazism and sexual deviance has gotten kind of like connected in popular imagination. Like some movie from the 70s, like The Night Porter or something, might be a good example. But like, there you can think of many of them, right? And there's like weird, so I am told, like Nazi porn type stuff or what, like, um, but the historical reality is that like we know that the overwhelming number of specifically high ranking Nazis in particular, and people in the SS, um, especially all the guys who were tried at Nuremberg, we know that they were like, because the Allies did psychological evaluations on these guys, right? And so we know that they almost invariably proved to be like psychologically normal, right? And there's some exceptions of kind of like sadists and stuff like this, right? But like really, really rare. And this is such an important point, I think, because it is just in general, when we're thinking about the Holocaust and thinking of its representation, like it is much too easy to think of the perpetrators as monsters or sociopaths or deviants, right? Because then we can distance ourselves from that. Like, we're not a monster, we're not sociopathic, and like we can think of that as like this aberration, right? And there is a strong tendency for understandable reasons, for kind of culturally, for us to sort of want to think of like the Holocaust as a great aberration in human history, or as other genocides as kind of aberrations, right? And it's simply, unfortunately, not true. I mean, for one thing, these genocides keep happening, right? But like, it's just it's a failure of recognition of what it means to be human. Not that like humans are fundamentally like kind of evil, or if you like reduce them to if you give them a chance, they'll prove to be murderers or something like that. Like, this, I do not think is the point at all. I don't think that's accurate. But that like it's a thing that human beings can do, right? And therefore, as humans, we need to take that possibility on board, right? So, in terms of making, in terms of like this character here, I feel like, to me, it kind of feels like Littell has like a failure of nerve or something like that. That when he brings the incest sort of story into things, or at least that's what I sometimes think. I mean, I really struggle with it a lot, because like you've got these two aspects of the book, and I don't know if y'all are familiar with the Robert Eagleston. He wrote a book called The Broken Voice, and it's about Holocaust literature, and he's got a chapter on the kindly ones in there, and I think it's really, really good. And one of the things that he says in there is that there's sort of like this split, right, between the kind of political, ideological explanations for genocide, and then there's the psychological, personal, familial ones that you were just mentioning, right? And I don't know, and maybe rereading the book would help me a little bit, but I kind of feel like the book doesn't know either, like what the relationship is supposed to be between these things, right? And like, how is that family story supposed to speak to this other thing? I think the book is at its most interesting when it is presenting the bureaucracy, to use the term you mentioned before, of how this event unfolded, which is a wonderful way of showing readers that this was not a pre-planned event from beginning to end, that like things happened along the way, responses to changing situations in the war. Like, this is the whole business with like Albert Speer kind of saying, we need workers now. You need to keep them alive. You need to extract this labor from them. That fight there between, different factions, people who want to kill everybody right away, and people who want to use, like, that was a response to how the war changed for the Germans, for example, right? And there's also other kinds of like intensifications, that surprised even the people who were involved, right? I think it's, again, the Holocaust. We think of the Holocaust as sort of this like fixed entity or whatever, but like there's not like the master plan. Hitler didn't write it all down in Mein Kampf or something, and then they just eventually did it, right? So I love that kind of element of the bureaucracy of the book and the showing of the system, if I could put it that way. And then I'm always like really kind of drawn up so sharply with the other story. And like, is the deviance there, the sexual deviance, the incest thing, supposed to explain how Max was drawn to the ideology? Because I'm not really convinced that works, right? Like, is the book saying like you can never put together these things, and like because you're looking for some kind of like explanation, and that's not going to work? That's maybe one reading. I feel like Littell has a lot of, like, he cares about this incest reading in some way, though, right? I mean, that's what gets him to his title. It's what gets him to this idea of these furies, which, and again, I don't really know. It's been a long time since I read that Orstaya stuff in college and stuff, but like that sense of different kinds of justice, right? Like that's what that play ultimately becomes about, is about like, like, do we have justice, like revenge justice, or do we have justice that's like, at a more removed level, like courts and stuff like that, right? And like, so I feel like he wants that story a lot so that he can get that element to come in. But uh, I don't know. Like, for me, that's the big conundrum of the book, where I'm like, I don't find it totally convincing. Like, even the juxtaposition of those two very different modes. Like, so it sort of seems like the failure of the book, even though I actually really like this book a lot in a lot of ways, but like that's sort of the thing where I'm like, I'm not getting that. Like, so I don't know. Like, what have you said about it? What have you been thinking? Like, I feel like it is the thing, right? Like, how to put those different parts of the book together.
Yeah. I, to me, it feels like the incest, and maybe this is, I don't know, the way incest always works, but in particular, he and his sister are twins. And there
Right.
seems to be a lot of focus. It's almost like The Picture of Dorian Gray
Mm,
by Oscar Wilde a bit. Like he looks in the mirror and
mm,
he sees his sister's face, and
mm,
he only feels complete if he's seeing her somehow in his own face. And so, yeah, I don't know whether we're supposed to think, well, he's full of self love, and therefore, it enables him to be able to do this stuff or to justify it, or it is, I think, confusing. And I, I talked about at the beginning of our project for the Kindly Ones how the literary criticism response was all over the place. And
mm-hmm.
I'm assuming that not all academics in your field probably have a great appreciation for the book. And I'm wondering
Yeah.
if it mostly turns on this sexual deviance piece.
It mostly turns, I think, on exactly that, or maybe not so much the deviance in terms of like, oh, that's gross or weird or inappropriate or something, but like the relationship of the two parts of the book. I think is the kind of the conundrum for a lot of people, right? The books, he writes the book in French, and I would imagine that it has a critical afterlife in France that is probably very different than for English language readers, and I just don't know that context, so I don't know, you know what I mean? But like, but I think, and it's not a book that is taught frequently to my knowledge. Like, in fact, I've never known any colleague of mine, like, in the field to teach it. Like, there's just so many practical barriers, right? Like, I mean, like,
Yes.
like it's just too fucking long, right? I mean, I think there's just a lot of other things, the question of the incest and how you talk about it and what you would do with it. I think that might also give people pause, etc. Like, I have done, like, I had did once an event where it was on the anniversary of Bobby Yar, and I did a thing where I excerpted a couple of pages from that incredible kind of set piece, and used that with students, which worked okay. So it could be excerptable a little bit, probably. Uh, Again, that is a really like important, uh, such a significant aspect of the Einsatzgruppen stuff, which I said is such a significant aspect of the Holocaust more generally. And so, the largest mass shooting kind of ever, right, within the Holocaust, those 2 days at Babi Yar, and there are other depictions. A lot of those have not been available to English readers. Some of the stuff is kind of getting more translated now, but to have his depiction of it is pretty extraordinary, and even just as a kind of like resource to have, to have something that, like, where people might get a sense of it, I think is sort of useful. But yeah, like, to back to your question, like, I think that the people are a little bit split on it. There are some people too in the field who like don't really want to talk about any books written like now being used very loosely, like, you know what I mean, but are like, no, that's not real Holocaust literature, only things from the period kind of count, you know what I mean? So there's that, which, not an argument I'm inclined to accept, but there's that element as well. There's some people who are like, there is no reason to teach perpetrator depictions because we just kind of risk kind of glamorizing that position or validating that position. um, I mean, to go back to this problem of like how to understand the incest stuff, like, I do think that what Littell is wrestling with, how self-aware he is of this, is what I can't figure out, and that's what makes me uneasy. But he's wrestling with what Hannah Arendt talked about in terms of the difference between the banality of evil and the radical kind of conceptions of evil, right? And she used banality in a really particular and strange way. Not that it was like just an ordinary thing, this kind of evilness, but that it was like superficial. It had no depth, right? And like the Eichmann as the kind of for her, and her understanding of Eichmann has been challenged by a lot of what we historians know now, like i.e. he was a lot more anti-Semitic than she thought he was, for example. He's not just a following orders kind of a guy, but like his inability to think critically, which she comes back to over and over again in her book on Eichmann, which was for her the sign of like that's that banality, right? Like he could only ever speak in cliches. And I think Littell does a great job in the book of showing the kind of like bureaucratic, cliched, eviscerated language that the Nazis are using, right? And that Arendt contrasted really profoundly to what she called like a radical or grandiose conception of evil. And she would offer lots of things like depictions of Lucifer or Satan throughout literature, like in Milton or all kinds of, or Shakespeare, other kinds of places, Faust by Goethe, like where evil is presented as like kind of thrillingly glamorous and as having like depth in a way, energy, the ability to make changes that you're kind of drawn to, right? And I always think this is sorry me riffing, but if you've seen Schindler's List, if you know the depiction of Amon Goeth by the commandant there of the Plaszow camp by Ray Fiennes, like that's a great depiction for me of glamorous evil. Like even though he's hideous in a lot of ways, glamorous doesn't have to mean like attractive, but like you can't stop watching him, and there's that sense of like that there's heft to that sense of evil, right? And that is like for Arendt, this was a kind of like that was the kind of evil that existed in literary representations, and maybe in past events, but did not exist during the Holocaust. Right? For her, there was a different kind of evil, and it didn't mean that it wasn't actually evil. Like sometimes people criticize her for being like, "Oh, she thinks evil's banal, and so she didn't think it was a big deal that they murdered all these people." Like totally not what she's saying, right? But that it is so empty in a way, so shallow. So it's almost as if I think that Littell kind of started off like, I'm going to do this shallow stuff and I'm going to like write a whole book that is in the first person about an empty kind of a person, which is a real trick and very interesting, I think. But then it's like he lost his nerve and is like, but maybe I should also throw in some really kind of like weird, deviant, glamorous shit. And again, glamorous not in the sense of like, wow, I love the fact that he like has like the hots for his sister or whatever, but like, you know what I mean? But there's like the train wreck kind of like can't look away, compelling kind of part of it, and like the implication that they like have had these twins, that there's further twins, that there are deviant children, which are somehow mirrored by these other twins, these policemen who are kind of not really policemen. I don't, like this weird psychological, subjective kind of personal stuff. So I don't know. It's like he I don't know if he just like a failure of nerve or something, or he's trying to deliberately contrast the banal and the radical conceptions of evil. That would be a more generous way of looking at it. For me, it's always felt a little too unresolved. Like, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like I'm just unconvinced that we're supposed to see a critique of that. Like I do feel like the novel kind of thinks that Raskolnikov part of Max is sort of awesome. I don't know. Do you know what I mean? Like, do you like that we're supposed this sort of like weird fever dream of the axe murderer sort of stuff, like
Yeah.
that it feels like the heart of the book in a weird way, and that is troubling to me because I feel like it shouldn't be. And again, it could be the way that the point is that maybe the book is saying like, you think that's the heart of the book? You're sick. The heart of the book is what these Nazis are doing to these innocent people. And like, so again, that would be the way to kind of recuperate and sort of save that. But again, I'm going off my memory from a long time ago, but I just remember that as having like this charge in a way that like this energy that like it's like the book got caught up in that in some way. You know what I mean? That
Yeah.
made it very hard for me just to read that as like a kind of critique or something like that. But
Well, it's too bad, I think, if people uh, are put off by the book or don't read the book or can't recommend the book because of that personal weirdness about
Uh-huh.
Max, because a couple of points that you made as we've been talking here now, I feel like the great strength of the book is this improvisational aspect of the
Yeah.
whole Nazi project that he
Yeah.
really focuses on.
Yeah.
You think about the parts early in the war, I guess in '39, when Max is, just going to the front and he's in Galicia, and
Hmm.
like it's it's a horror, but it's also like a disorganized mess, because
Absolutely. Absolutely.
the guys that are supposed to be shooting these guys and making them fall into the trenches, like, don't know what they're doing, don't want to do it, they have to give them a bunch of booze, and and then finally, I guess that is why you would know more than I, but like how you eventually get to the horror of like the
Yeah.
gas chambers and
It's
things, because
absolutely one of the reasons, right? Yeah, it's absolutely one of the reasons. I mean, famously, Himmler went to see one of the mass shootings near Minsk in Belarus, and he like almost passed out. And yeah, these guys were drunk a lot. They were on bennies most of the time, like and it was sort of, the work was deemed sort of like psychologically damaging to the perpetrators, and that was not the only, but certainly a significant uh, prompting of the transition, right, to what we typically associate with the Holocaust, right, and the like murder by gas. And the reason we typically think of it that way is because there were more survivors, not because people were surviving the gassings themselves. They were not, but because of this fight that is dramatized in the book of like selection for labor and the needs for labor, and like Auschwitz is the single place where the most Jews were murdered, but it was also the place with the most survivors, and so like that story has come down to us more because of that fact, right? But like, he knows the history, he knows it very well, and it's a great way to learn a lot of the history of this period. I really think it's a great strength of the book, and I want to circle back, Lori, to what you said about the disorganized quality. It is like a total Dan Stone writes about this. He wrote a very short and great accessible history of the Holocaust like 2 years ago or something. I recommend it to everybody. Like, it's only about 300 pages or something. It's written in a very accessible style. I think it is. If you're just looking for, I'm only going to read the one book, that's what I would recommend. But anyway, he talks there too about the myth of the Nazis as like cold-blooded, ruthless, efficient, industrial, mechanized killing, etc. Right? Like, and that they moved towards the gas chambers because they wanted to mechanize this even more, kind of. But like, they're like, it's chaos all the time basically, and like even when they start the gas chamber stuff, they initially are using carbon monoxide. They're just taking an engine at Treblinka and Kelno. They're just taking an engine into this little building. Like, this is not sophisticated stuff, right? Like, it's very hands-on, it's very visceral, it's very chaotic. It the chaos, the slide from which the Einsatzgruppen quickly, in just those few months, especially in Galicia, moved from like, we're going to find these Jewish men because we know they're communist sympathizers and we need to murder them, to like, we're going to murder every Jew. It doesn't matter if they're a 85-year-old grandma or a 6-year-old boy or whatever it is. That's a slide that happened. It was not like a planned thing. It's responding to events on the ground and intensification and kind of that sort of intoxication almost of like the ability to kill. Like, I think he captures that extremely well, like, so for those kinds of reasons, I actually like this book a lot.
yeah, and again, kind of slippery slope, or goals, or intent changing. Uh, this week we're reading, and I wrote a post that'll be up later this week about Littell gets into how the word actually changed, the word that you keep using for the final solution, eins.
Oh, the Einsatzgruppen. So those were the mobile killing units, the like the SS mobile killing units that like get sent across the east. Yeah.
But what the German word for final solution
Oh,
is
uh,
eins.
the
Einsgatz, or I don't know, something like that. But in this week's section, he talks about how the solution was first going to be like,
Uh-huh.
oh, make all the Jews go somewhere else,
Yes, yes,
or
yes,
just segregate them, or don't
yes,
give them any economic um, opportunities. And
yes,
then it just kind of got worse and worse until eventually, like, it just became kind of accepted over a few years, like, oh, well, the solution is actually, you
right,
know,
right,
the
right,
extermination of an
right.
entire race.
Which was not the plan from the beginning, absolutely, right? And there's a lot of things that paths that never happen. I mean, you're absolutely right that like the official policy for a long time, at least through 1938 and maybe up to 1941, kind of depends how you think about it, like was like forced immigration. Like they will make them have to leave. Life will be so unpleasant here that they're got to become someone else's problem, right? You know, like they made that very difficult because they then stripped everyone of their assets before they could leave, and the rest of the world was like saying no way. So the rest of the world has a lot to answer for there, right? Because they're like, we're not going to take these poor people, and they're going to be a
Yeah.
burden on our society, et cetera, et cetera. The United States said that among many other nations, right? Then the idea of like, yeah, maybe we'll put them all together somewhere. There were plans for like these preserves. These like there was one that maybe for a while they had this idea in Poland, the Nishko kind of preserve. There was a plan maybe Madagascar or maybe Uganda, like that, like like we're gonna send them off somewhere else, right? I mean, so yeah, like mass genocide in the way that it ended up taking place was a result, yeah, of some plans and stuff, but of a lot of happenstance as well, right? And so the way Littell depicts how history happens uh, is really good, I think, like really compelling. And even when things are planned from above, sort of the complicated nature of that and the unintended consequences, like I really, really, really love the chapter about the mountain Jews. I think that
Oh,
is, I
yes.
kind of think it is the best part of the book. I mean, in some ways, it's the
And
most
Voss.
boring, but right, but like so, like I think he is a genius, Littell. Like in moments like that, like where you like that is the chill, the cold bloodedness of a way of the kind of abstract intellectual kind of like debate that they're having about like, are we going to murder all these people or not? Like sometimes people still, and the Nazis did this too in their propaganda, will use like Talmudic as like a slur. Like the Talmud is like the book of, it's a book of kind of interpretations of Torah, right? Probably written in like 5th century Babylonia. Like, and so it's like all these rabbis, like kind of parsing out super details. Like Torah says this, but then how do we understand it, right? And this rabbi says such and such, and another rabbi is like, that can't be right. What about this? Well, and it gets really like detailed, right? Like incredibly detailed. Like, what if someone wounds you? What is your restitution? Well, what if you lose only a leg but you don't lose the rest of your body? What if you still can work even though you lost a leg? Like they get into all these possibilities. And so Talmudic as an adjective has sometimes become used as a slur for like hair splitting that is like almost inhuman, right? And like, the Nazis would sort of use this as like this sort of arid intellectualism of the Jews. Like that's all they kind of care about doing or whatever, right? Like that was one of their stereotypes. They had a lot of other stereotypes about how apparently like we're all masterminds, et cetera, et cetera. It was very contradictory as stereotypes, these things always are. But one of the prongs is like, these sort of effete intellectuals kind of arguing about something and like, the meaninglessness or whatever. Littell takes that idea, I think, and he's like, you want to see something Talmudic in the bad sense, not in the Talmud is actually an incredible document, and it's about being generative, like all these interpretations kind of trying to further knowledge, right? But this is about this like perversion of that, right? Like this incredible parsing out of like, are they ritually Jewish, racially Jewish, like this history, that history, bring in this guy who's an expert on this Indo-European language or whatever, like it's insane. It's insane of like the perversion of like knowledge and stuff that is going into this, right? And I just think Littell does an incredible job of like that's really evil. what they
Yes.
do there, right? Like, and there's no, I mean, of course, but what they do at Bobby Yar and many other places is also super evil too. But like they're both evil, and like they go together, right? But that bureaucratic uh, systematic, but like not systematic in the sense of like organized, but like also chaotic kind of sense of how this vast historical event came to be. I do think he's really good at showing
Yeah,
us that.
I think the Caucasus section is my favorite as well. And uh, what's kind of ironic about it, of course, is that there's all this like hand wringing and splicing and dicing about who gets to live and who gets to die. But at the end of the day, it all comes down to, oh, well, the German military really needs these people to be on their side and to continue to cooperate with them. And so that's what's gonna
Mm-hmm.
reign, not
Mm-hmm.
this academic
Right.
debate
Right.
about, oh, where does your language come from, and what percentage Jewish
Yeah.
are you or could you
Right.
be, and
Right.
yeah, those kind of
Right.
considerations.
Right. And doesn't it turn partly on the oil fields there, like in them having access to the oil fields, right? I
Yes.
mean, like, and
Yeah.
that's partly what I meant, what like similar to this whole idea of like the political exigencies of suddenly the German labor force is destroyed. Like the men are, everyone's at the front, they're mostly murdered and stuff. And like, what are we going to do? So now we're going to take some of these prisoners and force labor them, like as a response, right, to something sort of like something happening in the theater of war, right? And the oil fields thing is sort of similar, right? Like we need this so we can keep the tanks running and stuff, right? I mean, um, yeah, you're absolutely right. The like, I mean, that's a place where I can see the irony more clearly. Like all these intellectuals of the SS and the SD who are like, think they have this fancy armature and like a explanation for what they're doing, right? But we see the critique of that, right? Like, so it's very clear for me there, kind of or clearer where the text is, and it's a lot less clear to me to go back to this incest stuff
Yeah.
where it is there.
Yeah. So it's encouraging to me that I think, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you believe that the book is quite historically accurate when
Yeah,
it's
I
stick
think it.
when
I
it's
think it really is. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, of course, even though it's like the most studied event, one of the most studied events in human history, like we continue to learn lots of new things. And Littell has now written this book. I don't know, is it about 20 years now or something? So, you know, we are continually kind of like changing our understanding of the event. But like certainly with the material he had available to him at the time, I think it's really very good. And I've come across things later on that I've read that might be like more primary source materials, like whether testimony of people who like, escaped a particular situation or whatever, or I've sometimes thought like, of course, no specific examples coming to my mind right now, but I've thought like, oh yeah, like that's like in the kindly ones, you know what I mean? Like, and so like, I think he did do a shit ton of reading for this. And like, he said he read 200 books or something like this. Like he seems to have really done his homework. Uh, what you guys will shortly get to my other favorite scene in Pomerania, East Prussia, and what happens there correlates so much to report like the if you know the novel by Walter Kempowski, shoot the title which I'm blanking on. NYRB published it again a few years ago. All for Nothing,
oh yes,
which is a
I love
wonderful,
that.
wonderful novel. And you can really see what you'll see when you get to that section, how much, I don't know whether he read Kempowski specifically, it's quite possible. But like, or other accounts kind of from, what was going on in East Prussia, right in, early 45, very end of 44, beginning of 45, like he totally gets that atmosphere 100%, and Kempowski is someone who had a lot closer access to that material than Littell did. So yes, I think I don't know. Historians out there can say maybe more than I can, but my sense is that it really does dovetail uh, very well with a lot of the history, and I do love the way it just has no time for that kind of light Holocaust light kind of stuff that you see in so many. I even think a book like Zone of Interest, I love the movie, but I really hated the Martin Amis book, and I think it too is supposed to be research, but I think it's very much kind of a caricatured version of events, and he's doing a lot of things, Littell, and one of them is not making a caricature of this stuff.
Yeah. Well, you're much more read than I in this area, but I, I guess it might be fun just to name some other books. I know that I was seriously considering before I picked the kindly ones for the big book project right now, reading Vasily Grossman's Life and
Mm,
Fate, which really, I guess, mostly depicts, it's the Eastern Front, but a
hmm.
large part of that book is Stalingrad. I
Yes,
don't know. Are you an admirer of that book?
I'm a huge admirer of it. Yes, love it. Have not read Stalingrad, like the book that sort of predates it, as it were, right? Although I'd like to, but uh, you don't need to have read them in that particular order, I think, at all. I think Life and Fate is incredible. You know, it's like its emphasis is different, as you suggested, but there is the Holocaust aspect to Life and Fate, and it's actually pretty amazing that Grossman was able to write about this. Now, he was writing that book, as they called it, for the desk drawer, like he never expected it would be able to be published. Certainly was not published in the Soviet Union, like because the Soviet Union had this official policy, the so-called "do not divide the dead" policy, like i.e., that we should make no distinctions among the victims of fascism. So they were, as part of the kind of anti-Semitism that arises in the sort of like post-war Soviet period. So there's no recognition of Jewish, like of the Holocaust as we know it. You know what I mean? Like Jewish victims are just that's not they're just everyone's just victims of fascism, right? And everybody gave everything to Mother Russia to stop fascism. You know what I mean? And so um which like yeah, but also no. Obviously there are some pretty important differences, right, in terms of people's experiences. And so Grossman does give us some scenes, some glimpses. There's a famous chapter which is incredible, which is a letter from a mother to a son, and it's based on a letter that his own mother wrote from Galicia, from Berdyshev, from her place in what's now Ukraine. Like depicting what happened there in the short time between the Germans taking over and setting up a temporary ghetto, and then the liquidation, mass shootings and stuff. And so it's a remarkable, heartbreaking letter, and there are recognitions of the Jewish experience in Life and Fate that are pretty amazing, given when he's writing and where he's writing from. But just more generally, I find it, wow, what an accomplishment! Like
Yeah.
he's a great humanist in a lot of ways, and so you know it would be another great big book to do at some point. I think it's a terrific book. Yeah.
Another one of my favorites, it's not quite the same, but uh, Siegfried Lenz's The German Lesson. Do you know
Oh
that
yeah.
book?
I know of it. I have not actually read it. So
Yeah, that's a really great book about, I think it takes place probably before, like in the mid 30s or early 30s.
okay.
A boy's father is a police officer and a family friend is an artist, but his art is not appropriate, and
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
it but yeah, that's a beautifully written book as well. Any other favorites that you can recommend to
Well,
our group?
I don't even know where to start. It's like it's a terrible question. I mean, I think of course Primo Levi is very famous. The survivor, the writer, chemist slash writer, and his book, which is called in the United States Survival in Auschwitz, or If This Is a Man, elsewhere, a very early memoir, kind of canonical text of Holocaust literature. It's still incredible. If people have not read that, I think that's pretty important. I might give a shout out to the writer Tadeusz Borowski because he's not as well known. Borowski was Polish, non-Jewish Pole. He was arrested for basically, anti-fascist activities in occupied Poland, and he was sent to Auschwitz. where which was originally a camp for Polish prisoners, political prisoners, before it was developed and added onto, and this whole apparatus of the extermination, the crematoria system that happens at Birkenau, the second so-called Auschwitz II, and this whole it becomes a really giant place, this Auschwitz. But um, and Borowski wrote a bunch of stories. He called them stories. They seem to be pretty clearly modeled on his own experience, where like what he experienced in the camp. And one of the things that happened to Borowski was that he got put into this commando. Commando is like in the language of the camps, like a work detail, right? And he got put into the so-called Canada Commando. Canada was the slang for the like warehouse where prisoner functionaries were arranging, sorting all the stuff, the
Mm.
material objects, the baggage that people were bringing with them, right? And they thought they were being sent to some kind of labor or something like that, right? So he worked on the ramp for a while, like actually greeting the arriving transports and like basically separating people from their stuff. Um, the book is Welcome to the Gas, ladies and gentlemen, and is the name of one of the most famous stories. And then I think that's the name of the collection. It was retranslated a few years ago. I think Yale put it out in that Margellos series, I believe. As that title, Welcome to the Gas, ladies and gentlemen, suggests, they are like super dark.
Yeah,
Really, like they are at times kind of funny, and I've taught them many, many, many times. It's always a conversation to have about like, are we laughing at this? And how are we feeling about that? Like, um, uh, it's, it, they're wonderful texts in so many ways. One of the ways which they're so wonderful is for kind of really complicating that sort of perpetrator victim binary. Like, not to say that everybody was kind of a perpetrator, that is like totally not the point, but that like we like to separate the good guys and bad guys when it comes to the Holocaust, right? And like yeah, for sure we can sort of do that, but like when you kind of get it all more granular, like things get a lot messier very quickly.
yeah,
And these are great dramatizations of that, of that. So they're just excellent pieces. They're not that long. I so people within the field know him quite well, but other people might not so much. And then I'll just say one more name because I have to, and that's Ida Fink, uh, also a short story writer. She was grew up in what's now Ukraine. She was able to she got a false identity and had papers where she could pass as Aryan with her sister, and they were sent into Germany as like Ostarbeiter, as like workers from the east. So she worked on a farm in Germany. But she wrote a lot of incredible stories long after the war. She had immigrated to Israel at that point. And after being turned down by many publishers because they were like, no one wants to talk about this stuff, it's too depressing. She wrote a lot of stories, some of which are only like 2 pages long, about the like Holocaust by bullets, about people like going into hiding or being ratted out by their former neighbors, stuff like this. Like, so again, not the usual Holocaust sort of like Auschwitz camp barking dogs sort of fare, but like they are available in English. They are, I just think, so she's like people sometimes call it like the Chekhov of the Holocaust, and like that's actually a really good, if you could imagine such a thing, that's actually a really good description of her. And so, and also they factor female characters a lot, which I think is pretty important. There's a lot of other names. I mean, Lori, I could just do this like all day, and you would be like so tired. Oh, I'm sure you already are, but that's a couple of things to start with, anyways.
that's great recommendations. Just one last question: have you had a chance to check out the relatively new book in translation? That is, The Third Reich of Dreams. Damien
Mm,
Sarles has translated that. I think the
yeah.
author's name is Christina Brandt. Is that or Brannett or
Sounds
something like
right.
that?
I don't have it. I have not checked it out yet, but I have heard about it. And like so interesting. Seems so interesting to me. Did you read it? Have you read it?
I've dipped into it. I mentioned it in my post this week because
Mm,
there's a recurring dream that Max is having,
yeah.
and
Right.
this book, The Third Reich of Dreams, is most of the dreams are happening uh, by her Jewish neighbors and friends
Hmm.
in the like the 19, I think she said from 1933 to 1939.
Uh-huh.
And of course, we're like in I think 1942, 1943 right now in the kindly ones, but it's still really when there's a reason that Littell's putting all these dream sequences in
Yeah.
the book, right, of
Yeah. Yeah.
Max's, and to try
Yeah.
to kind of think about how you can try to push stuff down, but
Right.
subconsciously
Right.
you're going to have dreams that are going to like
Right.
manifest the horror.
Totally. And you can see that in the psychological vein in terms of thinking about dreams or his other symptoms, his like basically his body is like kind of like eating him alive from inside, right? Like you can't take it. But also from this mythological element too, like the Furies or the Eumenides are a kind of version of that, like return of the repressed, like you can try and push things away, but like here is a kind of embodied fantastical figure, or these figures, I guess three of them kind of like traipsing across the earth, and they're gonna find you, right? And so yeah, like, that fits in terms of like the interest in the book, and many books about this period, of course, that have in that sense of like the interest we might have in repressing things, but the inability to actually repress things.
Yes. Yeah. Well, Dorian, it was really a pleasure to have you on. I knew from the first day that I decided that we were going to read this book that I needed to have you talk to us about it from your academic perspective, and kind of because you know I like this book. I think it's well written, but in terms of like as a historically accurate document, I think that putting aside all the weird sex stuff,
Mm-hmm.
it's encouraging to know that you think it's well researched.
Yeah, definitely. It was again such a pleasure to do. Uh, Thank you again for the invitation. I know I rattled on a lot, so thanks for your patience too.
We loved your rattling. Thank you.
Thanks, Lori.